The stars didn't care. That was the first thing Mercer had learned in the 11 months since Earth burned. The stars hung in their ancient positions, indifferent and cold, the same way they had burned when the first humans looked up from African savannas and wondered what lived beyond the dark. They had not dimmed when 7 billion people screamed. They had not shifted when the oceans of Earth boiled into vapor and the continents cracked like dry clay, and the moon, the beautiful, stupid moon that poets had wasted centuries worshipping, had shattered into a ring of gray rubble that now orbited nothing. The stars simply did not care. Kai floated in the observation bubble of the Meridian's Ghost, a stealth-class courier ship roughly the size of a large apartment, and pressed his palm flat against the cold transparisteel viewport. On the other side of that glass was everything. The whole aching enormity of the universe. Nebulae like bruised flowers. Distant galaxies that looked like smeared thumbprints of light. And somewhere behind him, gaining on him the way a nightmare gains on a dreamer, the Dravak. He was 17 years old. He had not spoken to another human being in 11 months. He had not slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. He had not cried in a very long time, and sometimes he worried about that. He worried that the grief had simply become too large for tears, that it had expanded past the human capacity for weeping and become something else entirely, a cold and structural thing, like a load-bearing wall inside his chest. "Aiden," he said quietly. The ship's AI responded immediately. Its voice was warm and masculine, calibrated somewhere between a calm professor and a patient older brother. It had been his only conversation partner for nearly a year. He had given it a name. Artificial Intelligence Defense and Emergency Network, Aiden, because the default designation Unit 7 Courier Stealth had felt obscene in the silence. "I'm here, Kai. How far back are they?" A pause. Aiden always paused before delivering bad news, as though assembling the gentlest possible architecture of words. "The nearest Dravak tracking formation is approximately 4.3 light hours behind us. Based on their acceleration profile, they will enter sensor range in roughly 18 hours. And our fuel?" Another pause. "Longer this time. We have enough thrust capacity for approximately 6 hours of sublight maneuvering. The cascade drive remains non-functional. The tertiary fuel cells are dead." "I know." Kai pulled himself away from the viewport and drifted down the corridor toward the cockpit. The ship's gravity plating had failed in Section C months ago, and he'd long since stopped trying to repair it. He'd grown used to floating through that stretch of hallway like a slow ghost. "So they close the distance in 18 hours, and we can only run for 6. That's a 12-hour problem. That is an accurate summary of our situation, yes." "Great." He settled into the pilot seat, cracked synthetic leather, the right armrest held together with 3 strips of emergency bonding tape, and pulled up the navigational display. The holographic star map bloomed before him in cold blue light. He was in the outer reaches of the Viridian system, a dying red dwarf and its collection of dead, airless moons. Nothing here. Nothing anywhere near here. The nearest populated system, if populated, could still be applied to any place in the galaxy when it referred to species other than his own, was the Thurex Collective's trade hub, 42 light-hours away. Unreachable. Entirely, completely unreachable. He stared at the map for a long time. He was thinking about his mother. He did that sometimes. Ambush grief, he called it, where the memory arrived without warning, sharp and specific. Not the abstract ache of "I have lost everyone," but the precise and devastating detail of her. The way she'd smelled like the cedar shampoo she ordered from a small company in Oregon. The way she'd argued with sports commentators on the living room screen as though they could hear her. The small scar on her chin from a childhood bicycle accident. She had been in Sao Paulo when the first Dravak orbital bombardment began. Kai pressed his fists against his eyes and breathed. "Kai, I'm fine. You haven't eaten in 14 hours. "I said I'm fine, Aiden." A longer silence. Then, "There is a protein pack in the storage compartment to your left. I am not asking you to enjoy it. I am asking you to exist." Kai almost laughed. "I am asking you to exist." The AI had arrived at some fundamental understanding of what it meant to keep a grieving human alive. Not consolation, not philosophy, just eat the protein pack. Sleep the 3 hours. Drink the water. Exist. He opened the compartment and ate the protein pack without tasting it. He had been a student at the Meridian Space Academy on Callisto Station when the Drivak arrived. The Academy was a training ground for the next generation of humanity's deep space exploration program. Pilots, engineers, xenobiologists, all of them between 16 and 22, living in a spinning habitat above Jupiter's largest moon. There were 430 students when the war began. There were 11 when the station received the emergency evacuation order following Earth's fall. There was one now. The Drivak had not been subtle. That was perhaps the most horrifying thing about them. They had not crept up on humanity with gradual hostility or cultural misunderstanding or the slow burn of diplomatic failure that science fiction had always promised. They had simply arrived, 17 vessels, each one larger than the island of Great Britain, dropping from fold space directly inside the orbit of Mars. And within 6 hours, they had made their intentions perfectly clear. No communication. No demands. No ultimatum. Just weapons fire. The Drivak were a civilization 300,000 years old. They had navigated the galaxy the way humanity navigated an apartment, casually, intimately, with the ease of long familiarity. They stood between 2.5 and 3 meters tall, bilaterally symmetrical in a way that suggested a parallel evolutionary path, but their biology diverged wildly from human norms at almost every other point. Their skin was a deep chitinous black, segmented in plates along the spine and shoulders. Their faces were wide and flat with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, all of them a uniform silver white that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. They communicated primarily through a combination of sound and low-frequency vibration that other species required translation equipment to interpret. They had translated for humanity. Once. The message had been 6 words in Mandarin, which their advanced scouts had apparently identified as the most commonly spoken language on Earth. The prophecy will be fulfilled. No exceptions. Then the bombardment began. Humanity fought back. Of course it did. Humanity was very good at fighting back, had spent the entire length of its civilized history becoming better and better at the specific art of fighting back, and it threw everything it had at the Drivak with a ferocity that won grudging acknowledgement from every other species in the galaxy watching from a careful distance. The combined Earth defense fleet, 112 ships, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, engaged the Drivak formation above the Pacific Ocean for 6 days. Human pilots flew with extraordinary courage. Human engineers improvised weaponry in real time. Human commanders made brilliant tactical decisions under impossible pressure. They destroyed 2 Drivak vessels. 2 out of 17. And then the Drivak stopped playing defensively. What followed was not a battle. Battles have 2 sides. What followed was an extinction. Kai had watched it from Callisto Station. He had been strapped into an observation post with a screen in front of him that was supposed to be tracking orbital debris patterns for a navigation class, and instead he had watched his planet die. The Drivak bombardment weapons were things that human science had no framework for, pulses of force that restructured matter at a fundamental level, not burning or melting but unmaking, reducing complex molecular structures to their base components with a thoroughness that felt almost contemptuous. The oceans didn't just boil. They came apart. The crust didn't just crack. It dissolved, like sugar in hot water. The process took 4 hours and 37 minutes. Kai had been watching for all of it, and for a very long time afterward, he had been unable to remember any of it consciously, only finding it in his dreams, fractured, apocalyptic, playing on the screen of his sleeping mind in colors that didn't exist in normal vision. When he came back to himself, he was alone on Meridian's ghost, and the stars didn't care, and he was the last. The black market operated inside an asteroid, specifically, inside a hollowed-out carbonite rock roughly 3 kilometers in diameter, spinning lazily at the outer edge of the Viridian system. It called itself the Sump. Every intelligence service, criminal organization, and rogue trader in the 40 nearest star systems knew it existed. No one with a functioning government ever officially admitted to knowing it existed. It was one of those open secrets that the galaxy ran on, like dark matter, like institutional corruption. Kai found it because Aiden had found it, and Aiden had found it because Kai had asked Aiden to find him fuel, and Aiden had exhausted every legitimate option in 3 seconds. "I want to be transparent about the risks," Aiden said, as Kai guided the Meridian's ghost toward the asteroid's docking aperture, a wide, roughly circular hole in the rock that reminded him, unpleasantly, of a mouth. "You always want to be transparent about the risks. Because the risks are always significant." "Are there Drivak here?" No active Drivac signatures. However, the Sump's clientele includes several species with active information-sharing agreements with the Drivac hegemony. If your presence here is noted and reported, then we need to move fast and not be noted. Kai angled the ship's transponder array to broadcast a forged Thurex trader ID that he'd pulled from a destroyed freighter's emergency beacon 8 months ago. He'd been saving it. How's my disguise? The Thurex identifier appears credible at cursory examination. A dedicated scan would reveal the deception within approximately 90 seconds. Then 90 seconds is how long I have to make friends. He brought the ship through the aperture and into the sump. The interior of the asteroid had been transformed over what must have been decades of patient, illegal construction into a layered marketplace that filled the entire cavity from floor to curved ceiling. Hundreds of small platforms and walkways connected by tether lines and magnetic lift columns created a three-dimensional bazaar. The lighting was orange-red, sourced from strips of bioluminescent material that cast everything in the color of a low fire. The gravity was light and inconsistent, pooling in patches where portable gravity generators had been installed on the larger platforms. And the beings. Kai had encountered other species before the war. Callisto Station had hosted a rotating delegation of alien students and exchange scientists, but he had never seen this density of non-human life in one place. There were Thurex traders in their sealed environment suits, bulky pressurized things with rounded helmets through which their bioluminescent tendrils could be faintly seen pulsing. There were Selk merchants, slender and four-armed, their violet skin patterned with trade markings in iridescent gold. There were creatures he couldn't identify. 3 of them crouched together on a platform below him, vaguely insectoid but with warm brown eyes that suggested uncomfortable intelligence. No one looked at him. That, at least, was a mercy. The Meridian's ghost was docked at an exterior berth rather than having entered the interior, and Kai had suited up in a full EVA suit with a tinted visor before taking the connecting tube into the sump. He was humanoid-shaped, helmeted, and saying nothing. In a black market, those were credentials enough. He needed 3 things: fuel cells compatible with his drive system, a replacement part for the sensor array, and, if he was spectacularly lucky, any intelligence on Drivac patrol routes in this sector. The first 2 might actually be possible. The third was a fantasy. He found a fuel merchant on the 7th platform, a Selk who went by the trade name Anchor and who communicated through a translation box worn around one of their 4 necks like an oversized pendant. Anchor had the kind of stillness that suggested long experience in places where sudden movements got people killed. Cascade compatible, Kai said through his suit's external speaker, voice modulated to drop 2 octaves and obscure any identifying characteristics. Type 7 or type 9 cells. Whatever you have. Anchor's translation box rendered their response in flat, effect-free standard. Type 9 only. Price is 42 hegemony credits per cell, minimum purchase 8 cells. Kai had 73 hegemony credits, lifted from the emergency cache of a Thurex diplomatic vessel that had been abandoned in the chaos of the war's early months. He also had 4 human data chips containing pre-war Earth cultural archives, music, literature, film, language documentation. He had held on to them not for trading but because they were the last copies in existence. Everything else in those archives had burned with the planet. He had been telling himself he would never trade them. He was going to trade them. I have cultural archive chips, he said, keeping his voice steady. Human origin. Even through the EVA suit, he saw Anchor go still in a different way. Alert. Interested. Human is extinct. Human archive chips are therefore rare. The translation box was quiet for a moment that stretched uncomfortably. Then, 4 chips for 8 cells. No credits. 2 chips for 12 cells. 3 chips for 10 cells. Kai calculated. 10 cells would give him approximately 40 hours of cascade drive operation. Enough to reach the Thurex Collective's territory. Maybe enough to figure out what came after that. Done. He handed over the chips without looking at them. He needed not to look at them. He was halfway to the sensor array vendor when someone grabbed his arm. The being that grabbed him was almost his height, unusual, since most species in the galaxy ran taller, and was wearing a hooded cloak that covered everything from crown to knee. The hand on his arm, through 2 layers of suit and cloak fabric, was clearly not Selk. Not Thurex. The proportions were wrong for both. He had exactly enough time to process this before the being pulled him sideways into the shadow between two stacked cargo containers and pushed back their hood. Kai's blood went cold. The face was wide and flat, with 4 silver-white eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. Drivak. His hand went for the emergency sidearm on his hip, a small plasma pistol, half-charged, the only weapon left on the ship, but the Drivak caught his wrist before he completed the motion. Not aggressively. Just firmly, the way you'd stop someone from touching a hot surface. "No," said a voice from beneath the cloak, and it was speaking standard, not in the grinding low-frequency vocalization of the Drivak military. Standard, accented strangely but comprehensible. "I am not here to hurt you, Kai Mercer." The use of his name paralyzed him more effectively than any physical restraint. "I know," the Drivak said, quietly, with something that on a human face would have read as profound weariness, "because I have been looking for you for 3 months. Not to take you. To warn you. You know what I am." It wasn't a question. Yes. The last human. The prophecy's subject. For silver eyes blinked in sequence, top, right, bottom, left, which Kai had once read in a xenobiology text was a Drivak gesture of sincerity. "My name, in terms your language can approximate, is Veth. I was a commander in the 3rd Advance Fleet. I resigned that commission 11 months ago, 1 week after Earth was destroyed." "Why should I believe a single word you're saying?" Veth released his wrist, stepped back, reached into the cloak and produced something that made Kai's breath stop, a small object, roughly rectangular, that he recognized instantly. A human emergency beacon housing, the kind used on Meridian Space Academy personal locators. His own, which he had lost in the chaos of evacuating Callisto Station. "I found this in the debris field," Veth said. "I have been using it to track your trajectory. Not your ship signal, which your AI has done an excellent job of masking. Your specific biological signature. Humans have a faint electromagnetic resonance that Drivak sensors are calibrated to detect. They are using that signature to find you. All 47 ships currently hunting you." 47. He had known there were many. He had not known there were 47. "The Convergence Fleet," Veth continued, "is arranging in a pattern around the outer Viridian system right now. They have identified the sump as a probable resupply point based on your trajectory. In approximately 11 hours, they will collapse the net." Kai looked at the Drivak who had resigned a military commission because of Earth's destruction and felt something he hadn't expected. Not gratitude yet, not trust, but the raw magnetic pull of someone who knows your name and has sought you out across the dark. Which is something a person alone for 11 months feels with a force that is almost physical. "You said you wanted to warn me," Kai said. "What else?" Veth's 4 eyes blinked in sequence again. "I wanted to tell you what the prophecy actually says. Not the version the hegemony uses to justify your species' extinction. The original text, which very few living Drivak have read. Because," and here Veth paused, and the weariness in the alien's voice deepened into something older and sadder, "what it says is not what they told us. It was never what they told us." They sat in the shadow between the cargo containers for 40 minutes, Kai with his back against cold metal and his heart doing something complicated in his chest, while Veth spoke in that careful, accented standard. The Drivak prophecy of the returning light, the Veth Kai in the original language, which Veth explained was a linguistic coincidence that had initially made the alien deeply uncomfortable upon learning Kai's name, was 300,000 years old. It had been inscribed on the founding monument of the Drivak hegemony by the species' first great leader, a being whose name translated approximately as the architect. The hegemony had built its entire spiritual and political identity around this text. But the hegemony had been editing it for 30,000 years. The original text, Veth explained, described a future in which the Drivak would encounter a young species, young, by Drivak standards meaning any civilization under 1,000,000 years old, that carried within its genetic architecture what the architect had called the resonant code, a biological pattern that was the physical embodiment of an ancient cosmic principle that the Drivak called the unmaking and remaking. The prophecy warned that this species, if destroyed, would leave behind a single individual, one being alone among the stars, who would carry the resonant code in its most concentrated, activated form. And that being, the text said, had 2 possible destinies. In the edited version the hegemony had used for 30,000 years, that destiny was simple. The last of this species was a catastrophic threat, a bomb with legs, and the only safety lay in its elimination. In the original text, the second destiny was the one the hegemony had cut. What does it say? Kai asked. Veth reached into the cloak again and produced a data chip, Drvac manufacture, a flat hexagonal disk that pulsed with dim internal light. It says that the last of the young species, if it chooses to use rather than simply survive, carries the power to seed new life across the galaxy. The resonant code, fully activated in isolation, becomes a template, a foundation, what your species might call a genesis engine. Kai stared at the data chip. That sounds like your death would be a catastrophe for the Drvac, yes. But not because you would destroy what they have built. Veth's 4 eyes met his steadily. Because you would build something they cannot control. Something new. Something that would change the galaxy's balance of power permanently away from 300,000 years of Drvac dominance. The silence between them was dense and cold and full of stars. Why are you telling me this? Kai asked. Because, Veth said very quietly, I was there above Earth. I watched what we did. And I have been living with that every day since. And I thought, a pause. Something moved across those 4 silver eyes that Kai had no human name for but recognized anyway, because grief looks the same in any configuration of face. I thought that perhaps the original prophecy could still be true. If the last human survived long enough to understand what he carries. Kai took the data chip. He didn't say thank you. He didn't know how. But he took the chip, and he looked at the Drvac who had spent 3 months in self-imposed exile tracking him across the dying systems of the outer galaxy, and he nodded once, the human gesture of acknowledgement that crosses all cultural contexts because it is, at its root, simply the language of I see you. Veth nodded back. Go, the Drvac said. 11 hours. And Kai Mercer, your ship's AI has been hiding something from you. Something important. Ask it tonight. He pushed the Meridian's ghost out of the sump and into open space with 4 hours to spare, the new fuel cells already installed and humming in the drive housing. The Cascade drive sputtered to life like a long-dormant animal waking up angry, and Kai pointed the ship's nose away from Viridian and burned hard for the outer dark. 3 hours into the burn, with the sump a sensor ghost behind him and no Drvac on scope yet, he unstrapped from the pilot's seat and went to the rear of the ship. Aiden. Yes, Kai. I need you to tell me something. And I need you to tell me the truth. The AI's voice, when it came back, had a quality he had never heard in it before. Something that was not quite hesitation but was adjacent to it, the way a person sounds when they have been waiting a long time to have a conversation they know will be hard. I've been wondering when you would ask. Kai stopped walking. You've been waiting. I have been waiting for the right moment, which I was not certain would ever arrive. I apologize for that. I want to explain why I made the choice I did, if you'll let me. Talk. Before Earth was destroyed, Aiden began, I was not only a courier ship AI. My deeper architecture, the systems beneath my navigational and logistics functions, was built by a team of scientists from the Global Defense Initiative's Classified Research Division. Project Lazarus. They had been working, for 6 years prior to the Drvac attack, on a theoretical framework for what they called species reconstitution technology. The idea. Aiden. Kai's voice was very quiet. What is actually on this ship? A long pause. Then, in the reinforced cargo pod in Section D, the one whose manifest I told you contained emergency rations and spare components, there is a device. The scientists called it the Crucible. It is, another pause. It is the culmination of 6 years of work by 47 of the greatest biologists, geneticists, quantum theorists, and xenobiologists humanity ever produced. They finished it 3 weeks before the Drvac arrived. They loaded it onto me, onto this specific ship, specifically because I was a stealth-class courier, the least likely vessel to be intercepted or inspected. And they programmed me to protect it at all costs, including the cost of your knowledge of its existence, until I determined that the situation warranted disclosure. Kai's hands were shaking. He noticed this from a distance, the way you notice weather outside a window. What does it do? It is, in essence, a biological reconstruction engine. It contains a complete human genetic library, every known genetic variation of Homo sapiens, approximately 400,000 distinct genomic sequences, synthesized and stored in quantum-stabilized medium. It also contains a terraforming seed array, compressed ecological packages for 47 Earth biomes. And it contains... Aiden's voice became, somehow, quieter without becoming softer. It contains the recorded consciousness architectures of 212 people. Not their bodies. Their minds. Their memories, personalities, knowledge, identities, stored in digital format by the Project Lazarus team in the weeks before the end. They could not be saved physically. But they could be saved this way. Kai sat down on the floor of the corridor. He sat down because his legs stopped working. 212 people. Stored in the ship he'd been flying through empty space for 11 months, grieving the death of everyone he'd ever known. Stored in the room marked cargo/emergency rations. 212 minds, alive in the dark behind a door he'd walked past 1,000 times. "Aiden," he said, and his voice was something he barely recognized. "Is my mother in there?" The silence that followed was the longest Aiden had ever given him. "Yes," the AI said. Dr. Lena Mercer, xenobiologist, recorded on March 14, 2299. 8 months before the attack. She was part of the Project Lazarus volunteer cohort. She knew what the project was. She knew it might be the only. Kai put his face in his hands. He stayed that way for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were dry, but something behind them had changed. Some tectonic shift, some fundamental rearrangement of the landscape inside him. The grief was still there, enormous and structural. But alongside it, occupying the same impossible space the way two truths can coexist when they are both necessary, was something else. Something he had not felt in 11 months. "Tell me how the Crucible works," he said. "Tell me everything." They found it 3 days later. The Thurex Collective's territory began at a binary star system called the Auric Pair, 2 yellow-white stars orbiting each other at a distance of roughly 60 million kilometers, surrounded by a rich disk of planets and stations that formed the main commercial hub of this galactic neighborhood. Kai had been aiming for it as the nearest safe harbor, somewhere the Dravaka's reach was nominally constrained by diplomatic reality. He was still 4 hours from the system's edge when Aiden's voice cut through the cockpit with an urgency he'd never heard before. "Kai, stop the ship." He stopped the ship. The cascade drive cut out, and the Meridian's ghost went silent and dark, the instinctive response, one that Aiden and Kai had drilled into muscle memory over 11 months of running, when the AI used that specific tone. "What do you see?" "Gravitational anomalies," Aiden said. "In a pattern that is not natural. 11 discrete gravity wells, distributed in a sphere approximately 8 light-hours in diameter, centered on the Auric Pair system's outer boundary." A pause. "They are Dravak gravity anchors. Military-grade mass displacement devices. They've seeded the entire outer system with them." Kai pulled up the sensor display and looked. Aiden was right. The gravity signature map, when rendered visually, showed 11 pulsing points arranged with a geometric precision that was unmistakably artificial. Not debris. Not stellar phenomena. A net, woven across an entire solar system, waiting. "If we enter the system," Aiden said, "the anchors will activate. They generate a gravity cage, a localized field that effectively nullifies cascade drive function. We would be trapped inside the system with no faster-than-light capability. And they'd be waiting inside." "Almost certainly." Kai stared at the sensor display. 11 anchors. 8 light-hours to cover. No way in, no way around. The Auric Pair was the only accessible system within their fuel range. The trap had been laid by someone who understood his options better than he did. They knew he was coming here. They had known before he did. He sat very still and thought about his mother's voice, which he hadn't heard in a year, which was stored 80 meters behind him in a cargo pod alongside the last hope of humanity. He thought about Veth, who had told him what the original prophecy said. He thought about what Aiden had told him about the Crucible's design, not just the genetic library and the consciousness archives, but the third component, the one that Aiden had saved for last. "Tell me again about the resonance emitter," he said. "The Crucible's third component," Aiden said. "In the event that the Crucible is deployed in a location with existing compatible biological substrate, a planet with liquid water, sufficient atmospheric pressure, stable temperature, the resonance emitter activates the reconstitution process. It essentially broadcasts the genetic library as a terraforming signal, seeding the target environment with the building blocks of terrestrial life. Over decades or centuries, the process would build a new Earth. A new ecosystem of Earth origin. Yes. But it's not a weapon. No. The Crucible is not a weapon. It was never designed as one. A pause. But there is a secondary function in the emitter's design that the Project Lazarus team included as a contingency. If the emitter is fired in open space rather than at a planetary target, if it's activated in a star system with multiple gravity wells, the resonance frequency interacts with stellar gravitational fields in a way that... Aiden. Kai leaned forward. What happens? The gravity anchors, Aiden said slowly, are attuned to Dravak gravitational frequencies. They operate within a specific resonance band. The Crucible's emitter, if fired at full power in the auric pair system, would generate a resonance frequency that is another pause, and Kai recognized this one as the pause of an AI calculating something it wasn't certain it should say. It would be the equivalent of a jammer. A very large, very thorough jammer. Every piece of Dravak gravity technology within the emitter's range, anchors, drive fields, tactical gravity weapons, would be knocked offline simultaneously. Kai was very quiet. For how long? Unknown. Based on the emitter's power output and the anchor's shielding specifications, estimated minimum disruption, 4 to 6 hours. Enough time to get through the system. Potentially. If we moved immediately and at maximum thrust. And the Crucible itself? A pause. Using the emitter as a jammer would consume approximately 60% of its stored energy. The reconstitution function would still be viable, but significantly weakened. The ecological seeding packages would be partially degraded. The genetic library would be intact. The consciousness archives. Aiden stopped. Kai felt his stomach drop. The consciousness archives would be reduced to approximately 80% of their current stored data. Some identities would be lost. Some would be incomplete. A beat. Some specific individuals, depending on which data sectors are damaged, might be irretrievably lost. The silence in the cockpit was total. His mother might be among the ones lost. There was no way to know without activating the emitter. She might survive the process intact. She might not. He might be asked to risk the one person he had just learned was still alive. Alive in whatever sense the word applied to a mind stored in quantum-stabilized medium, in order to create a path through a trap. Kai Mercer, 17 years old, last human alive, sat in the cockpit of a damaged ship at the edge of a solar system salted with gravity traps and made a decision that felt like it cost him something from a place inside himself that had no name. "We go through," he said. "But we don't fire the emitter yet. Tell me everything you can see about the spacing of those anchors." It took 3 hours to find it. Aiden and Kai went over the anchor placement pattern 17 times, looking for gaps, asymmetries, anything. The gravity wells were extraordinarily well placed, overlapping at their edges to eliminate most viable corridors through the net. But they were, in the end, placed by intelligence that was anticipating a human in a stealth ship trying to sneak through. They had not anticipated what Aiden called the asteroid option. The auric pair system's outer disk was thick with large carbonite bodies, remnants of failed planetary formation, ranging in size from boulders to objects several kilometers across. Most of them were useless. But 3 of them, at a specific set of coordinates that took Aiden 40 minutes to calculate, were in an orbital configuration that created a natural gravitational shadow, a region where the overlapping pull of 3 asteroid-scale masses partially cancelled out the anchor fields. The gap was 600 kilometers wide. The meridian's ghost was 40 meters long. "I can thread that," Kai said. "The navigation precision required would be extreme," Aiden said. "Any deviation of more than 200 kilometers from the optimal path would bring us within the anchor's effective range." "I can thread it." A pause. "I know," Aiden said, and there was something in the AI's voice that sounded almost like pride. He flew it manually. He had always been the best pilot at Meridian Space Academy, which was a fact he'd never been particularly comfortable with because it felt like bragging, but it was simply true the way some things are simply true. Not because of arrogance, but because of 3,000 hours of simulator time starting at age 11 and a spatial intuition that his instructors had described in terms that embarrassed him. He flew it manually because Aiden was better at calculation, but Kai was better at feel, and threading a 600-kilometer gap between 3 large asteroids while a gravity net tried to grab the ship like a spider web grabs a fly required both in equal measure. His hands on the manual controls were absolutely steady. He flew at minimum power, minimizing their gravitational signature, creeping through the asteroid shadow at a speed that felt geologically slow. The asteroids loomed massive on either side, gray and pitted and ancient, their surfaces scarred by millions of years of micro-impacts, and Kai navigated between them with a patience and precision that emptied his mind of everything except the immediate geometry of the moment. They were 12 minutes through the passage when the first Drivak ship appeared. It came from behind the second-largest asteroid, a patrol vessel maybe a third the size of the Meridian's Ghost, and it was moving with the efficient economy of a predator that has identified its prey's location. The sensor alert was a soft ping in Kai's earpiece. Aiden, calm as always, and his hands were already adjusting before his conscious mind had processed the information. "They've detected our heat signature," Aiden said. "The asteroid shadow masks our gravity profile, but not our thermal emissions." "How long to the anchor gap exit?" 4 minutes. "And there?" 90 seconds from weapons range. 90 seconds to close. 4 minutes to the exit. A 2.5-minute problem, which was, arithmetically, a catastrophic problem. Unless... Aiden. The emitter. Kai. I know what I might lose. Fire it." The silence lasted exactly 1 second. "Firing," said Aiden. The Crucible's resonance emitter had never been tested in field conditions. The Project Lazarus team had run simulations, had calculated theoretical outputs, had believed in their models with the conviction of people who had staked humanity's last hope on their accuracy. They had been right. The emitter discharged as a pulse of energy that was mostly undetectable by conventional sensors. No flash of light, no visible beam. Just a wave of resonance at a frequency that interacted with Drivak gravitational technology the way a strong magnet interacts with carefully arranged iron filings. Immediate, total, catastrophic. Every one of the 11 gravity anchors went dark simultaneously. The Drivak patrol vessel's drive field, which, like all Drivak military craft, operated on integrated gravity technology, stuttered, lurched, and died. The ship went dead in space, tumbling slowly, without power. Kai hit the cascade drive at maximum output and shot through the gap like a needle through silk. The Auric pair burned ahead of them, double-star warmth filling the cockpit viewport, and Kai was shaking. Really shaking, both hands trembling against the control surface, as the system's interior opened up before them. He could see the lights of Thurek stations in the distance, amber clusters against the dark. "The archives," he said. "Tell me." Aiden was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "The consciousness archives are at 78% integrity. We lost 34 identities entirely. We have partial data on 19 others." A pause. "Dr. Lena Mercer's archive is intact. 96% data integrity." Kai's whole body released something, some sustained, 11-month tension, some held breath at the cellular level, in one long, shuddering exhale. He put his face against the cool surface of the pilot station and breathed. "She's there," he said. "She's there," Aiden confirmed gently. The Thurex Collective's Council of Trade met him in a sealed chamber aboard Anchor Station, their main diplomatic hub, with a wariness that Kai fully understood. He was the last member of an extinct species who had arrived in their territory, having apparently detonated some form of gravity weapon across the Auric pair outer system, with 47 Drivak warships converging on their border. He put the data chip Veth had given him on the table. "This," he said, "is the original text of the Drivak prophecy. Not the edited version. The version that the hegemony has been suppressing for 30,000 years." He looked at the cluster of Thurex representatives, 8 of them, tentacles moving with agitated speed beneath their environment suit helmets. "Your xenolinguistic teams can verify its authenticity. The Drivak have been building their justification for galactic dominance on a lie. And I can prove it." He spoke for 3 hours. He spoke about what Veth had told him, about the Crucible and what it could do, about the original prophecy's second destiny, not a weapon, not a catastrophe, but a genesis. A new beginning. He spoke about 47 scientists who had died on Earth knowing that the work they finished in the weeks before the end might matter. He spoke about 212 people whose minds were stored in a cargo pod on a damaged stealth ship and who deserved to be remembered and, someday, perhaps, given back some form of existence. He spoke about what it was like to be 17 and alone in the universe. When he finished, The chamber was very quiet. The eldest Thurex representative, a being of considerable age, their bioluminescent tendrils moving in a slow, thoughtful pattern, reached across the table and placed one tentacle briefly, deliberately, on Kai's hand. The translation came through Anchor Station's system 3 seconds later. "We have been afraid of the Dravak for a long time. You are very young to carry such a heavy thing. We would like to help." The next 72 hours were the most diplomatically chaotic in Thurex collective history. The original prophecy text, once verified by 3 independent xenolinguistic institutes, moved through the galaxy's non-Dravak civilizations like a detonation. Not an explosion of violence, but of information, the kind that changes everything it touches, that rearranges the landscape of what was believed to be true. The Selk Confederacy, the Vanthri Republics, the 6 species of the Deepening Alliance, all of them had been, for varying periods, living under the weight of Dravak dominance justified by a prophecy that said the hegemony was cosmically mandated to lead. The original text said nothing of the sort. Within 48 hours, the Thurex Collective had issued a formal diplomatic challenge to the Dravak hegemony's justification for the extinction of the human species. Within 60 hours, 4 other major civilizations had co-signed the challenge. Within 72 hours, the Dravak fleet formation around the Auric pair system had stopped advancing. Kai watched it all from a room aboard Anchor Station that the Thurex had given him, small, simply furnished, with a wide viewport facing the binary stars. He barely slept. He ate when Aiden, through his earpiece, reminded him to eat. He tracked the diplomatic developments on a data screen and felt, for the first time in 11 months, something happening in the galaxy that was not moving toward his death. Veth found him on the 3rd day. The Dravak rogue commander arrived on Anchor Station by a route that Kai never fully understood and probably never wanted to, walking into the room without announcement and sitting across from him with the particular heaviness of a being who has been carrying a great weight and has not yet put it down. "The Convergence fleet has received new orders," Veth said. "They have been recalled for internal consultation. A faction within the High Council is using your evidence to call for a full constitutional review of the prophecy's foundational role in hegemony law." A pause. "It will not be a quick process. The Dravak are not a species that changes quickly. 300,000 years of institutional momentum." "I know," Kai said. "But it's moving. It is moving." Veth's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "You are still in danger. There are factions within the hegemony that will never accept this. They will not stop hunting you. I know that too. What will you do?" Kai looked at the binary stars burning in the viewport. 2 suns, older than humanity's entire existence, burning together in their slow gravitational dance. He thought about Project Lazarus. About the Crucible sitting in Section D. About a planet, somewhere in the galaxy, he just had to find it, with liquid water and stable temperatures and sufficient atmospheric pressure. About decades and centuries of patient work. About what the original prophecy had called a genesis. "I'm going to find a planet," he said. "The right one. And then I'm going to go home." It took 4 more months to find the right world. Aiden ran the search in parallel with everything else. The ongoing diplomatic maneuvering, the constant low-level threat monitoring, the quiet work of reinforcing the Meridian's ghost with materials and components that the Thurex provided with the careful generosity of people who have decided, after a long time of looking the other way, to do the right thing. Kai slept more. He ate without being reminded. He learned 12 words of Thurex in the evenings and forgot 9 of them every morning, which Aiden found statistically remarkable. He talked to his mother. It wasn't what he'd expected. He had thought, if he'd let himself think about it at all, that it would be devastating, an approximation of the real thing designed to comfort him and failing in all the ways that mattered. He had been prepared for disappointment. He had not been prepared for the accuracy. Aiden had built an interface that allowed the stored consciousness archives to communicate, not fully, not continuously, not in any way that suggested the archived minds were experiencing a normal existence, but in limited, text-based exchanges that pulled from their stored identities with a fidelity that the AI's voice, when explaining this, took on a quality of quiet reverence for. Dr. Lena Mercer communicated in full sentences. She used the particular constructions his mother had always used, starting thoughts with "well, the thing is," and ending them with "you see what I'm saying?" She asked about his health in the same specific sequence: sleep, food, water, but how are you actually? He told her everything. All of it. 11 months of everything. She responded over the course of 3 days of exchanges, in her limited medium, with all the love and intelligence and fundamental reliability that he remembered, and the grief was still there, the structural grief, the load-bearing wall, but something had been laid alongside it that was not its opposite and not its cure but was nonetheless real and necessary. She told him she was proud of him. He was very glad there were no cameras in the cargo bay at the time. The planet was in the Calyx Nebula, a young, active star-forming region 300 light-years from the Auric pair. It orbited a G-type star not unlike the Sun, at a distance that placed it squarely in the habitable zone. The Thurex survey data called it Calyx 7D and rated it as geologically stable, hydrologically active, and biologically precomplex, meaning it had microbial life and the structural framework for more, but nothing yet with eyes. Kai saw it first on a sensor display, a soft blue-green smear of reflected starlight, and felt something tear open in his chest in a way that was not painful. He flew the Meridian's ghost into the planet's orbit manually, the way he flew everything that mattered. The planet filled the viewport slowly, growing from a smear to a disk to a world, oceans vast and silver blue, land masses dark and green-brown, clouds in long white spirals over both polar regions. It was not Earth. It would never be Earth. But it was something, and it was alive, and it was waiting. "Aiden," he said. "Yes, Kai." "Run final checks on the Crucible." "Running." A pause. "Genetic library. Intact. Ecological seeding packages. 41 of 47 biomes viable. Consciousness archives. 178 intact identities, 19 partial." Aiden's voice went quieter. "Reconstitution emitter. Functional. All systems nominal." Kai sat for a long moment in the pilot's seat above a world that had no name and no history yet, and he thought about 47 scientists working in secret in the last weeks of their civilization, building something in the dark, not because they would survive to see it matter, but because it might matter someday to someone, and that was enough of a reason. He thought about hope as an act of engineering, not a feeling but a decision, a set of calculations and materials and carefully stored genomic sequences held together by the pure audacious insistence that the future was worth building even when you couldn't see it. He thought about his mother saying, "You see what I'm saying?" He did. He activated the Crucible. The resonance emitter, in reconstitution mode, did not produce a visible effect at the ship's level. What happened was more fundamental and more quiet than that. A signal broadcast in biological frequencies that penetrated atmosphere, reached ocean surface, touched soil, carried its extraordinary complex message into the planet's existing microbial substrate and began, slowly and irrevocably, a conversation that would last a very long time. The ecological seeding packages deployed as microscopic dispersal units, atmospheric delivery designed, scattering across both hemispheres in patterns calculated to maximize biodiversity and minimize ecological competition. The genetic library began its work at the molecular level, not duplicating, not copying, but informing, providing the templates and the blueprints from which something new could grow. Not cloning Earth. Building from its DNA a new world with its own identity, its own path, its own future. In 3 years, the first complex plant life would appear. In 15 years, the first insects. In 200 years, something with a face would look up at the sky. In 1,000 years, something with a name would look up at the sky and wonder. Kai watched the planet turn below him and knew that he would not see most of it. He was 17, and he was healthy, and he was human, and he had roughly 6 or 7 decades of biological time left, which was both an enormous gift and, in the scope of what he had just begun, a very small installment. He would see the early years. The first complex life. Maybe the first tentative steps toward complexity. He would document and record and protect as best he could. And when he was gone, the archives would carry it forward. The 178 intact identities in the Crucible were not ghosts. They were not relics. They were teachers and scientists and engineers and artists and parents, stored in their completeness, waiting to be part of whatever came next. Aiden would maintain their integrity indefinitely. Future generations of humans, grown from the genetic library's templates, born on a new world under a new sun, would have access to the knowledge and the culture and the stories of the civilization that had preceded them. They would know about Earth. They would know its music and its literature and its bitter, extraordinary history of making things and breaking things and making things again. They would know that it had been beautiful and complicated, and that it had been destroyed by a force that had misunderstood a prophecy for 30,000 years. And they would know about Kai Mercer, who had been 17 and alone in the universe and had found a way. He named the planet Lena. He didn't tell Aiden why. He didn't need to. The AI registered the naming without comment, updated the navigational charts, and, after a moment, added a small notation in the ship's log. Name chosen by K. Mercer, first human of the new era, in honor of the old. He moved the Meridian's ghost into a stable orbit and began the long, patient, necessary work of staying alive. He ate. He slept. He made contact with the Thurex Collective's diplomatic channel and filed a formal declaration of planetary claim on behalf of what he titled, with a formality that felt both absurd and profoundly important, the second human civilization. He received, within 24 hours, 11 acknowledgments from 11 different galactic species. He received, within 48 hours, a communication from within the Dravak hegemony itself, from the reformist faction, whose name he couldn't pronounce, who were engaged in what would prove to be a generation-long constitutional struggle. The message was brief. Its translation read, "The original prophecy is being restored to the public record. The debate continues. We are sorry for what was done. It will not be undone. But it will be remembered correctly." He wrote back, "Thank you. I am going to build something. You are welcome to watch." On the evening of his first full day in orbit, if evening is a meaningful term for someone orbiting a planet rather than living on one, and Kai decided it was, decided that he was going to maintain the human practice of marking time by light and dark for as long as he was alive to mark it, he floated in the observation bubble and pressed his palm against the cold viewport. Below him, the planet turned. Lena turned. His world, that would be, turned with the unhurried confidence of something that had existed long before him and would exist long after, and was nonetheless changed now by his presence, by the signal he had sent into its soil, by the conversation between old life and new life that had begun and would not stop. The stars did not care. But he did. That, in the end, was all the difference that had ever mattered, in the entire long and complicated and mostly accidental history of humanity. Not that the universe cared about them, but that they cared about the universe, cared about each other, cared about the future with a ferocity that was sometimes beautiful and sometimes disastrous and was, at its irreducible heart, simply love in its most fundamental form. The insistence that the thing you love should continue, should keep existing, should grow. He was 17 years old. He was the last human. He was the first human. He pressed his palm against the cold viewport and watched his new world turn in the light of a new star, and for the first time in 11 months, he smiled. "Aiden," he said. "Yes, Kai. What's the weather going to be like down there today?" A pause. Not a heavy pause, not a worried pause, but the light pause of an AI recalibrating its entire operational context around a boy who had just asked about the weather on a planet no human had ever stood on, as though this were a normal Tuesday. "There is a significant storm system developing over the northern hemisphere," Aiden said. "Warm air mass from the equatorial region interacting with cooler polar currents. It should produce extensive precipitation and some impressive electrical activity." Another pause. "It will be spectacular." Kai watched the cloud spiral tighten over the northern pole of his world. "Yeah," he said. "It will." And below, in the deep quiet of oceans that had never held a fish, in the soil that had never held a seed, in the ancient microbial dark that had been waiting in patient molecular silence for 3 billion years, something new was beginning. Not because the universe had planned it. Not because a prophecy had decreed it. Because a boy who had every reason to stop had chosen, instead, to start. That was enough. That had always been enough.